introduce my good friend and colleague, the Reverend Amy Heimerl. It says that she's part-time vicar. There's no such thing as being a part-time priest, and so she's very much a full-time priest, just paid hardly at all, at Heimerl, at the Church of the Ascension Episcopal Church in Heimerl, which is up north, way up north. Jim and I had the pleasure of learning about their farm. Her husband is here, Eric, and they live on a farm. And they are the most incredible people. Jim and I have known them for many years. They are fellow people from the Diocese of Fond du Lac. And so that's how we've known them. Yeah.
Could you stand up?
Oh.
Eric, stand up, please, so people know who you are. Yeah.
But can you imagine going to work, having to leave all of your stuff, including your cell phone, all your personal items? A woman can't have her purse, going through metal detectors, going through security every day, and then going to meet with a bunch of teenagers from Milwaukee who are no longer at home. They're there in this juvenile correctional facility that is not a very nice place to be. And they're there because they earned their way there. This is Amy's day. In addition to serving as an Episcopal priest, Amy was a special education teacher for 27 years before she was called to this ministry. She was actually called to be an Episcopal priest, she said, at age 15, but she fell in love, she had children, she had grandchildren, and finally she was able to fulfill her call.
Finally, I listened to God. That's what
Well,
it was.
you've been listening to God, Amy. Anyway, it is my pleasure to introduce Amy Heimerl.
Thank you. Thank you. Is the sound okay for you? Okay. So I'm Mother Amy Heimerl. As she said, I'm the vicar at Ascension Episcopal, a small church in northern Wisconsin in Heimerl. And I am the full-time chaplain at Lincoln Hills Copper Lake School. So first, I'll just have a short history. Lincoln Hills was opened in 1970, and it began as a school for troubled youth. We have a large campus surrounded by a 12-foot fence, topped with 3 rows of razor wire. This is a picture of the gate. All living units have a courtyard behind them, some with a fence around them. In the late 1990s, Lincoln Hills housed 350 to 400 boys, and there were about 1,000 total kids incarcerated in Wisconsin. In 2004, that number dropped to about 650, and by 2011, that number was 350, which prompted the closing of Ethan Allen School for boys and Southern Oaks School for girls. All incarcerated youth were transferred to Lincoln Hills at that time, and Copper Lake, which is the name for the girls' facility, was opened on the grounds of Lincoln. Today, our average daily population is only around 70 youth, not even a tenth of the population of some 20 years ago. The boys and girls living units are separated by a fence topped with razor wire. All the youth in general populations go to the school, the recreation building, the administration building, and the Holy Spirit Chapel. The age range of youth in our care is 13 to 19, with more boys than girls. We get new kids every 2 weeks, and as youth finish their programs, they leave. The average stay is between 6 and 8 months. At least half of our youth come from Milwaukee County. Dane County makes up about 35%, the rest come from Racine, Kenosha, Brown, and any other county around the state. I started teaching at Lincoln Hills in '97. I left after 7 years to go teach in the public high school. I never thought I would return to Lincoln, but God had a different plan. In the winter of 2017, I began a discernment process, seeking God's voice and direction for my life. I've heard God's voice many times, and I wasn't expecting God to say I'd be the chaplain at Lincoln Hills. I thought that was pretty funny. I loved my current job in the public school, and Lincoln Hills already had a chaplain, so, good one, God, okay? But as you probably know, when it comes to God's plan for our lives, we can run, but we cannot hide. Just ask Jonah. So 6 months later, in the summer of 2017, I returned to teaching at Lincoln Hills. 2 years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. 2 months after that, the previous chaplain retired, and thus began an HR adventure that taught me to trust God's timing. It took almost 2 years, but God's plan will not be stopped. Just ask Noah. So why am I telling you all of this? As I said, most of the youth who are incarcerated at Lincoln Hills, Copper Lake come from this area. Maybe not Whitefish Bay, but not far down the road. As you may or may not know, Lincoln Hills has a checkered past, and the current plan involves closing it as a juvenile facility and reopening it as an adult facility. So what does that mean to you? Well, there's a plan to build a Type 1 juvenile facility in Milwaukee. Although it will probably be a couple years until it's built and ready, I want you to hear an alternative story about Wisconsin's incarcerated youth. And I want you to begin praying about how and where you might fit into that plan for these of God's children. I will share poetry and prose with the prayer that it will inspire you to minister in the way that you can to the youth in and beyond your community. When I am feeling weary or heavy laden, writing is my coping mechanism. It helps me process my feelings and find the hope inside of what can feel hopeless. The stories I will share are true, but the names, the dates, and the details have been changed, plucked out, mixed up, and melded back together to become unrecognizable to the unknowing ear. Before I go further, I need to say that every single youth at Lincoln Hills is there because they committed a crime, and sometimes many crimes. Some have hurt others, some have taken away what doesn't belong to them, and sometimes that even means another person's life. They must have consequences for their actions, and I do not believe it is unfair for them to be there. Without me saying that, the stories that I will be sharing might make you think I'm just a bleeding heart who wants to open the gates and let everyone out. I'm not. I mean, I am a bleeding heart, but I don't want to open the gates and let everyone run wild. I want to help. I want the youth to get the help they need. So when they go back to their communities, or let me say it like this, I want the youth to get the help that they need so that when they come back to your community, they don't create more victims. I hold the need for accountability in one hand and the need for compassion in the other, and I bring them together in prayer. Please join me. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Holy Lord of mercy and grace, pour out your spirit of love and compassion as we sit in the reality of the brokenness around us. Move and inspire in us the desire to serve your most vulnerable children in the way that you see fit. You know our gifts, our motivations, our strengths, and our weaknesses. Reveal the path before us. If we are called to pray, help us pray. If we are called to give, help us give. If we are called to serve, help us serve. If we are called to weep, weep with us so that we learn how to weep with others too. Help us learn that we don't need fancy answers to difficult problems. We just need the grace and mercy of Jesus so that we may extend it to those who don't look like, act like, or think like we do. We need you, Jesus. We all need you. Amen. Let's start near the beginning. It was the late 1990s. My classroom was a busy place. I had a student assistant that we will call Peter. Peter was 16 when I met him. He had been sentenced to 1 year, although he turned it into more by acting up. Peter's was a strange situation. He was a refugee. His mom brought him and his siblings to America to escape the violence and poverty they were experiencing. They were looking for a fresh start. Despite working hard, his mom struggled to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She got into a relationship mostly to have help with the bills and another adult in the house, but the man she was with was violent and abusive. Peter watched his mother get beaten so often that it was all he saw when he closed his eyes, and the trauma triggered a rage inside of him that seemed to have no end. And it wasn't long before the man began to take his anger out on Peter, too. In response, Peter's anger grew, so did his body. By the time he was 16, he was big enough to fight back and win, or lose, depending on who's telling the story. One day, Peter and I were talking, and he made a comment about his anger issues. To be honest, I'd never seen him get angry. He was respectful and funny and kind to everyone. But that day, when he talked about his anger, I must have given him the, what the look, because he swung around and I saw a flash in his dark eyes, and he looked into mine and he said, "Do you know what I did to get here? I killed a man. I stabbed him over and over. Do you know how hard that is? No one can do that unless they are filled with rage. And do you know what's worse? The judge gave me 1 year. 1. He hurt my mom, he hurt me, but did he deserve to die? I took his life and got 1 year. Do you know what it feels like to have done that? Do you know what it feels like not to get what you think you deserve?" And then he sat down and began to sob, and so did I. It was a turning point for us both. I wonder, did you hear that question he asked? Do you know what it feels like to not get what you think you deserve? Do we? I mean, that is a question with a million layers. Peter didn't deserve having to leave his home country because of violence. He didn't deserve what he had to endure. Yes, Peter did something horrible, and he is haunted by it every single day of his life. Yes, he needed to have a consequence for what he did. Yes, he deserved to be at Lincoln Hills. But what he really needed, what he really deserved, was help and hope before it got to the point it did. Before he killed a man, he needed his mom to have an affordable place to live so she didn't feel trapped into staying with an abusive, violent man. Peter needed a safe way to express his emotions so he could handle the trauma he endured. The layers of Peter's story take more time than we have today, so I will say this: we need to deal with and help each other deal with our own inner stuff before it deals with us. Because it will, even if we won't. One way or another, we will all feel the effects of our own and others' inner stuff, inner brokenness. Which brings me to a piece I wrote in response to Peter. It's called "We Shouldn't Be Burying Our Children." Our kids are growing up in a world that is moving too fast for them to learn anything but how to survive, and some aren't even learning that. What about the love, the caring, the compassion? Who is going to teach them right from wrong and why it's supposed to be that way? Who is going to hold their hands when they fall or pat their backs when they make the right choice? We can't keep turning our heads and blaming others. If we don't try to help them, then we shouldn't be so shocked by the crazy things they do. They weren't born knowing how to please or how to be accepted, just born knowing they wanted to be. So if we don't show them that we love them and they're important to us, somebody or nobody will. And we shouldn't be burying our children before they are dead. Let me tell you about Dara. Dara was an athlete. Given the right conditions, she could have run college track. Instead, she ran in other ways. Dara's mom died when she was a child. Just because her mom was gone didn't mean that Dara didn't still need her, though. Dara and her dad did the best they could, but a couple years later, on the anniversary of her mom's passing, her dad was killed. Dara went to live with her grandma, who loved her dearly, but Dara was still reeling from the losses she endured. She hadn't dealt with her inner stuff, so it dealt with her, which means she ran. She ran away from her home thinking she was running away from her problems, but we all know that is not how it works. Dara began numbing the pain with things that lowered her inhibitions, and she made some choices that resulted in her being sent to Copper Lake. I was her English teacher at the time, and Dara began to discover the healing gift of writing. We'd begin each class period with a writing prompt, and one was, describe a time you were happy. The next day, she showed me a picture. It was her as a young baby, probably about a year. She said, I look like I'm happy here. She had a wide smile and innocent eyes, and it was just too much for me. Tears stung my eyes, and she asked me to keep the picture, to remember that there was a time she was happy. Fast forward to Mother's Day. I picked up some extra hours working care team. Care team is staff who are called to living units to talk to youth who need help coping. I was called to Dara's living unit. Mother's Day was just too much for her that year. She was upset and refusing to go into her room on time. As I looked at her tear-streaked face, all I could see was a happy child in the picture. Dara wrapped her skinny arms around my waist and sobbed for her mom, for her dad, for what she had, and for what she no longer had. The mother in me offered to tell her a bedtime story. She looked at me with the eyes of a child and nodded. After the story, I prayed a bedtime prayer with her, and she calmly walked to her room. It was that easy, and it was that hard. This piece is written for all who have grown up too fast. As I look at the face of these children, I see in their eyes they are much older than their years. They have seen too much, heard too much, felt too much to be children. My heart screams something different, but my mind tells me what I already know. So I cry. I cry for those who have been here and those yet to come, and I am outraged. I cannot believe the lives they have lived in these short years, and I can hardly believe that they have survived all they have. So I ask you, Father, show me my place in all of this. Am I to help them grow up, or am I to help them be children? In the late 90s, Wisconsin passed a law that automatically charges 17-year-olds as adults and allows youth between the ages of 14 and 16 to be waived into adult court, depending on their crime. This means that about a quarter of the population at Lincoln Hills, Copper Lake, is heading to prison to finish their adult sentences that they began as juveniles. Some have a couple years, some have a lot of years. These are often the hardest goodbyes to say, knowing what's coming next for them. No matter how confident or tough they talk and act, the fear in their eyes says it all. This is for the adult commits. I wish that for your 18th birthday you were getting presents instead of prison. I hope you have learned to see the good in yourself even as you pay for the mistakes you've made. I hope you have learned that you are meant for more than concrete walls, metal bars, and heavy steel doors. You are meant for more than a 2-inch mattress, Velcro shoes, and plastic sporks. You are meant for more than recycled air and fluorescent lights. You are meant for fresh air and sunshine. And while you are inside that institution, do not let that institution get inside of you. Keep your head up. Let your heart be broken. Let your heart be broken. And remember, you are not what you did on your worst day. You are meant for so much more. I need a drink. On my first Sunday as a chaplain, I walked into one of the living units with my collar on. The youth had known me as Miss Heimerl, their teacher, and now I was Mother Amy, their pastor. One youth ran up to me, and the first thing she said was, "Will you baptize me?" The short answer was yes. The long answer was, "I need to get permission from your guardian. We need to talk about what it means." A week later, this child was the first person baptized that I baptized in the Holy Spirit Chapel, and as far as I know, this child may have been the first person to ever be baptized there. Since August of 2021, nearly 120 kids have either been baptized or have renewed their baptismal vows. I am blown away at their desire to seek forgiveness, their desire to open their minds and hearts to the love of Christ, and their desire to believe that there is a different way. Some kids make big changes, and some not so much. I guess it's kind of like what happens after our own baptisms, right? Their desire to believe that there is a different way doesn't mean they will live a different way, just like our desire for something doesn't make it so. Some kids I baptized are doing great. Some have reoffended. Some have come back. Some have gone to prison. Some are waiting to get caught. 2 of them, may they rest in peace, are part of the 224 Milwaukee homicides in 2022. This piece is for one of the boys who was killed. I am told he died in the arms of another former student, and it was another former student who's accused of pulling the trigger. I just don't know where to start. Do I start from today or from the day I found out? Or do I start from the day you breathed your last and the streets got you? Or do I start from the last letter that you wrote me when you said you wanted to change your ways and that you were going to be a daddy? Do I start from your 18th birthday? Or do I start from the last time I saw you, when we ate dinner together, played Uno, and waited for the count to clear? Do I start from the day I baptized you? When I held your face in my hands and I looked deeply into your eyes and told you you were sealed by the Holy Spirit and marked as Christ's own forever? Do I start from the first and last time we broke bread together, or the day you refinished the altar for me and I asked you to tag the underside? I see your tags all over the place. You know, you definitely left your mark. Do I start from the first day you called me your mom, or when I called you my son? I just don't know where to start. Maybe I should start from the creative way you worked on reading and writing, asking me to Google love letters so you could copy them for ideas. I wonder how many girls you charmed with those borrowed words. Do I start with the first time you lost your cool and shattered the windows, or from the last time you did? Or do I start from the first time or last time you climbed on the roof, or the day you climbed up a tree and stayed in it for hours? Do I start from the first time you braided your hair in pigtails so we could be twinning? Back when I had hair. Do I start from the first day we met in 2017 when you were just a little kid with short hair, dark eyes, and a timid smile, and you called me your teacher, and I called you my student? I just don't know where to start. Rest in peace. Rise in glory. God loves you. Let me tell you about another young man I'll call Jack. The first time I met this young man, he was in the reception unit. He was on the phone yelling at the person on the other end like he was the biggest, baddest dude around. I will not repeat what he was saying, but I walked away thinking, holy hell, he seems a bit much. But you know, God has a way of taking our holy hell moments and making them holy. A couple weeks later, he came running up to me and asked to be baptized. I was shocked. This boy, who was screaming into the phone a few weeks earlier, was asking to be baptized. We talked about what it meant, and I asked if he was sure, if it was really what he wanted. He said yes. He wanted to be a new person. He wanted to hang up his boxing gloves, he said. I hate to admit it, but I was a little skeptical. I told him I needed permission from his guardian, and he ran to the youth phone. He called his grandma immediately. As soon as she answered, he handed me the phone, and it became quickly apparent how deeply she loved him. I'm not sure who was more excited about his upcoming baptism, him or her. Between this day and the day of his baptism, Jack was assaulted by another youth that we'll call Tommy. Jack didn't fight back at all, and it wasn't pretty. Jack was baptized about a week later, and the smile on his face was the biggest, most genuine smile I have ever seen on him. He was glowing despite the shiner and the stitches. It was like he just stood a little taller. A few weeks after his baptism, Jack had a birthday, and I have celebration dinners with individual youth in the visiting room for their birthdays or right before they leave. The food is the same that they would get in their living unit, but for some reason, they say it tastes better. Talking to Jack during dinner was like talking to an old soul. I couldn't believe this was the same kid screaming into the phone a few weeks earlier. He wanted to talk about everything that led to his incarceration, which, by the way, would break your heart. He told me his plan to move his grandma out of the city to where it's safe, and his desire to graduate while at Lincoln Hills. Jack also told me he was asked by a detective if he wanted to press charges against Tommy. He said, no, I know he's going through a lot, and I don't want him to be punished for having a bad day. Jack knew that Tommy's mom was dying, and she passed away a couple of weeks later. The grace Jack extended was almost beyond belief, and when I said this to him, he said, it's because grace has been given to me. Some days can be really hard on the hill, and then I have a conversation like this, and I'm reminded that it's all worth it. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying that every youth who is baptized is a complete 180, but I can say that as I gaze into the eyes of the freshly baptized and tell them they are sealed and marked as Christ's own forever, their eyes brighten and their lips curl into smiles, and for that moment, they feel the presence and they feel the love. Sometimes it feels like I am holding two realities, one in each hand. Let me explain, or try to. Beautiful results can come from broken moments if we can just hang on when we're in the middle of the broken stuff. It's like a flower growing through a crack in the concrete, unexpected beauty in the midst of brokenness. A young man I'll call Terrence was baptized shortly after he arrived, and a few months later, his sister was murdered, another one of Milwaukee's unsolved homicides. Terrence's family, and especially his mom, struggle with the loss and the lack of closure. Can you imagine grieving such a loss without your family by your side? Terrence did what many of us do when we don't understand why bad things happen. He got really mad at God, and he questioned if God is even real. He wants to believe. He wants to have hope. He wants to heal, but he's really hurt. I get it. Maybe you do too. These kids experience a lot of loss, some before they arrive at Lincoln, some while they're there. I try to help them heal however I can. If they like to, we have a short private memorial service. I print prayers and pictures of their loved ones for them to have. Part of Terrence's healing journey was a desire to record himself singing memories for his sister. I printed the lyrics so he could practice, and I used my iPad to videotape him. His first take was pretty lifeless. I told him so. I said, try again and act like your sister is right here with us, because I believe she was. He American Idol'd the second take. And when he finished, he looked at me and said, what just happened? Who was that? I said, that, my dear, was the work of the Spirit. I haven't seen him smile like that in a long time. If I can help these kids heal, if I can help these kids find hope inside the fence and hope inside of themselves, if I can help them take one step closer to God, then the hard days are worth it. That's what I mean about the beauty coming from the broken. And as Groucho Marx said, blessed are the cracked, for they shall let in the light. It was a crisp, clear night. The full moon was on full display in every possible way. When I arrived at one of the girls' units, two girls were exchanging words loudly. What began as a verbal altercation, however, turned into a desperate night for a girl I'll call Jessie. Jessie had been carrying a lot of inner stuff for as long as she could remember. When she realized she couldn't release it by fighting the other girl, she began to fight the staff. As staff struggled to get her safely to her room, she was fighting the flashbacks as much as she was fighting them. She screamed and she gut cried, and I swear I could hear the cries of her ancestors. I stood there praying for the Spirit to make herself present, to come quickly. But in the Spirit's wisdom, she patiently waited to show herself. And then, when the threat of harm to herself and others was over, when the panic had passed, Jessie began to talk about the harm done to her preteen body. And I again heard the cries of her ancestors, and we wept. We cried out to Jesus in prayer for love, grace, mercy, and healing to fill her, to drive far from her any snares of the enemy, to release her body, her mind, and her spirit of any trauma she carried, trauma she had endured herself or absorbed from others. As I left for the evening, I looked in the eyes of the men who had become her targets, and they heard her ancestors' cries too. Some days are harder than others. A week later, Jessie was baptized, and I held the beautiful and the broken I looked deeply into her eyes and told her she was sealed as Christ's own forever. As I I met Ricky in the springtime. He arrived angry and apathetic with long, wild hair, dark, darting eyes, and a keen sense of everything that was going on around him. It was easy to see that this kid was a survivor. To say he trusted no one was an understatement. And honestly, the list of those he trusts now is pretty short. Although he spent some time in general population unit, his impulsive choices led to more time than most kids spend in our skills development program. Ricky would often make himself scarce when he saw me coming. I offered him a cross necklace and a Bible. He declined both. I asked him if there was anything he wanted me to pray for. The answer was no. I told him if he needed anything to let me know, and he let me know that he did not need anything. Ricky went by the beat of his own drum, and forethought was not his strong suit. One mild spring day, the temperatures provided perfect running weather, and he was itching to run. The fence around the facility means youth are not able to run away, but at times youth will run away from where they're supposed to be. Usually it's more of a disruption than a danger. My radio informed me that there was a runner heading up toward Chapel Hill. I went outside only to catch Ricky's gaze for a moment. I called to him to stop, to come sit down, come talk to me. He hesitated for a split second, took a couple steps my way, changed his mind, pivoted, and took off toward the rec field. He eventually gave himself up and was brought to the skills development unit. I asked him later why he didn't stop and come talk to me. He said he thought it was a setup. He thought someone would come grab him. I told him if he just did what he was supposed to, no one would ever grab him. His eyes said, yeah, right. Over the next few months, we developed a rapport. I would print off corny jokes, and I encouraged him to tell them to the staff. I wanted him to see that the staff were not out to get him, and that if he positively engaged, they too would see a kid who'd been hurt too many times, hiding behind a mask he thought he had to wear. Staffing at Lincoln Hills is a constant battle, which means many difficult things. For me, it means that instead of having service in the church on Sundays, sometimes I go to the living units and I offer prayer services there. Some kids just want a paper copy of the service to have in their rooms for later. Some want to pray as a group, and some decline any of it. Ricky began as the latter, although that didn't stop me from offering. Eventually, Ricky began accepting a copy. Then he began asking for a copy. After another few months, Ricky asked if I would pray one-on-one with him at his door. He wasn't sure about the praying in a group part yet. On the Sundays that I go to the living units, I bring the reserved sacrament with me to offer to the youth. Ricky had never had communion, and he didn't know what it meant. I shared with him what Jesus had done for us and Jesus' love for him. I told him that he belonged, that he was a child of God. He took the bread, and after he did, he visibly shook. He said, wow, I just got the chills. That's amazing. Which, by the way, he's not the only youth that has happened to. Ricky became a faithful attendee, always inviting others to join us. He developed a hunger for the bread, and he asked for it every time he saw me. Maybe it was the bread, or maybe it was the time, maybe it was the prayer he craved, maybe it was all of it. A few months later, he asked to be baptized. Shortly after, his impulsivity got the best of him, and he ended up back in the skills development program. He would have to get a few good weeks of good behavior under his belt before he'd be allowed to leave the building and come to the chapel for baptism. A couple weeks turned into a couple months, but eventually he earned his way back to general population. This was on a Tuesday. The plan was to baptize him on a Sunday. Well, impulsivity struck again, and he ended up back in the skills development. We found out he was leaving Lincoln Hills before he would be able to come to the chapel. So he was baptized in a classroom on the living unit, which that's happened multiple times. But there is more. See, when weather permits, many youth request to have the baptism water dumped over their heads outside. This is a tradition that was started last summer by a youth I'll call Charlie. But it was way too cold outside that day to douse Ricky with a bowl of baptism water. However, where there is a will, there's a way. So imagine this. 4 of us gathered in the youth shower room, fully clothed. Ricky spread out his arms. I lifted the huge bowl of water he was just baptized in and slowly dumped it over his head. When the bowl was empty, he smiled from ear to ear and gave a loud whoop. I knew from the beginning that God was pursuing Ricky's heart. God was using me, corny jokes, and the bread to do it. It's that easy, and it's that hard. It is an honor to be with the youth at the beginning of their beginnings. They often get excited about their newly forming faith, yet it's difficult to support their spiritual development without materials that they can understand. One simple example of this is the Bible. A young man who was just 13 years old when he arrived is the one who inspired my quest for a good graphic Bible. He hadn't outgrown picture books yet, and on his first day there, he held up an NIV. He said, "Mother Amy, what am I supposed to do with this? Don't you have a Bible I can understand?" The youth are often overwhelmed by the translations of the Bible that I have available. Well, let's be honest. Aren't we all a little overwhelmed by the Bible? As a state-run facility, I don't have access to funds to purchase Bibles designed for youth. I began seeking grants, and I've received donations for 80 epic Bibles, graphic Bibles that are much easier to understand than a typical Bible. I've distributed almost all of those Bibles. I've distributed almost all of those Bibles, and many kids are taking them home with them. When I showed a sample to one of my youth, he said, "Wow, I'd turn off my TV to read that." These are the epic Bibles. They're about $25 a piece. I brought a couple that people can look at after. Perhaps you've surmised that my ministry there is not conventional, and I'm committed to do whatever I can to share the love of Jesus. The stakes are high, and as James Baldwin said, "For these are all our children. We will all profit from or pay for whatever they become." These kids deserve to know that they are deeply loved and divinely made. Now, I could talk for hours, but our time is limited. So I will close with one more piece. It's a long one, called The Wrecking Ball. This is for Tala and all the children who share her story. She came in like a wrecking ball, and I wondered what could have happened to this child to make her act this way. Lord help her. She had learned to keep people away with her volume, her vocabulary, and her violence. Flight or fight were no different to her, and she accomplished both at the same time. Protecting herself one way or another had been the air that she breathed, but she was desperate for acceptance, desperate for anyone to care, whether she would admit it or not. She had been unwanted, unneeded, and unloved by the people who should have loved her the most. The lessons forced upon her were hard and hurt like a slap to the face, although a slap to the face was the least of it. The bile that oozed out of her came from wounds as deep as her bloodline. The generational oppression was a chain around her neck and the neck of her ancestors. But if anyone can break the curse, this girl can. She is strong, and she is brave, and she is smart and funny and loving and compassionate. Despite the pain she carries, she shines like the sun breaking over the horizon. But sometimes it gets a hold of her. And when she looks in the mirror, she thinks she sees what the people who should have loved her see. And then the wrecking ball comes out again. She doesn't want to hurt others, so she swings it toward herself, afraid to believe the bad, afraid to believe the good. And she wonders if she should just fade away after all. She was told by those who should love her that she was going to hell anyway, for the things she's done, for the things she's left undone, and the things she's even thought about doing. She was told a lie, or 1,000, about a vengeful God who will never forgive her, who would never want to forgive someone like her. She was told so many lies, it makes me wonder how many people have turned away because a vengeful God was shoved down their throats instead of Christ being revealed from within them. A foundation of manipulation and fear is like a house built on sand. God is love, and anything else is blasphemy. Who do we think we are defining God's will or grace or mercy? So the night before she left, we ate dinner. We watched a cartoon of her choice. We talked about getting through the night and getting a job and a diploma and getting on her feet. And then I had the honor and joy of baptizing her. This child of God finally believed the truth about herself. And when it was done, she grabbed me around the waist, hugged me tight, and said, I am saved, I am saved. My prayers go with her. She has no real home to go to. My stomach turns at what she might need to do by her choice or not for a meal and a place to lay her head. This was a hard one, maybe the hardest one yet. My heart broke wide open as she clung to a girl whose life is a mirror image of her own, whose fate will be the same except the snow will fly before she's released. As they clung to each other, they sobbed for themselves, for each other, for the mothers who never wanted them. They sobbed for what was, for what is, and what will be. They sobbed from a place so deep that I felt it in my gut, and it tasted like a mouthful of ocean. Lord, help her. Lord, help them. Lord, help us all. Amen. So, do you have questions?
Are there questions for Amy?
So other than the, perhaps the 16 and 17-year-olds going to adult prison, why is the population decreasing?
So there are a few, that's a good question, and I don't know that I have all of the correct answers. One is youth crime is probably down some. The other thing is that youth who are committing crimes are not necessarily sent to Lincoln as quickly as they had been or incarcerated as quickly as they had been. They are trying to develop programs and have programs in their communities to help kids, and which should happen. I mean, incarceration should be a last resort. And so I think it's a combination of a couple things. Having kids at Lincoln Hills is very, very expensive. The counties have to pay a lot of money, a daily rate, and I don't want to misquote it here, but anywhere, it might be around $1,000 a day, but if I'm wrong, I apologize to whoever really sets that. But it's a lot of money that counties have to pay. So, you know, if I were a stakeholder in a county, I would want to invest that money in my community instead of in a juvenile prison. So, yeah, that's part of it. And we are getting a little better, maybe as a society, to go like, okay, locking, you know, locking them up and throwing away the key isn't the answer. We've realized it doesn't help. I mean, it can help some, okay? I'm not, but it doesn't necessarily help them change. So, yeah.
Another question.
Could you give us an example of a story in the Bible and why it's more readable for them?
Sure. So I can just show you. So the Bible, this Bible, it's all a graphic Bible. And I'll tell you, one of the most beautiful parts, before you even get into it, this is the first thing they see, that one of the illustrators. Now, as you probably surmise, our American justice system is extremely, I don't know if I should say racist, but it is clear that the majority of my kids don't look like me. They look like this. And so for them to see an illustrator that looks like this, that number one, it gets them excited. The next part is they can easily follow the story. And on the bottom, what I really love is that it has the references, the scripture references. So I have had kids say, can I get an epic Bible? And then can I get the other one too, so I can read the whole story and compare? And it's a beautiful Bible. And like I said, I don't know, am I answering your question?
Yeah, what reading level is it?
Well, this reading level is probably about a 7th grade or so, I would say, but not all of it. I mean, that's probably the highest is a 7th grade, because some of our kids have quite low reading levels. So it's much more accessible than the regular ones. And it's also more age appropriate than some of the illustrated Bibles make it like they're for children, and it's almost insulting to say, oh, here, take this. And they're like, I'm not a kid. And I get it. So this is the one that I found that's the most appropriate. You can pass this around too. Other questions? Jim?
So is this the only facility in the state of Wisconsin? Because I'm just wondering, these kids at their young age are taken away.
Right.
And taken away from perhaps members of family that do love them.
Right.
And it's almost like they're punished, which in some ways they have to, but when they're at a fragile age as they are, don't you think if there was more resources or do family get to visit or?
Sure. So a couple things. Lincoln Hills is the only type 1 juvenile facility in the state, and type 1 is it's like maximum security for kids. There are youth who if they have severe mental health needs, or they we'll just say severe mental health needs. We do have like 30 beds at Mendota Juvenile, and we do send kids there as well for really additional treatment and to serve their sentences while they're there. There are a number of detention centers around the state where kids go while they're waiting to be sentenced. So it's once they are sentenced, then they come to Lincoln Hills. Depending on their status, if they're an SJO, which means serious juvenile offender, they are given a 5-year sentence. That doesn't mean that they have to serve all 5 years inside. They have to serve like a minimum, usually of, I think it's maybe a year inside for the minimum, and then they get out on probation, but they can be, sent back for breaking their probation, et cetera. Yeah, did I answer? Oh, there's a process of how they get there. Yeah, I mean, they and some kids have committed many, many crimes before they're actually sent there. And I think, gosh, if we could have got them a little sooner, maybe it would have helped. But yet, on the other hand, we're 3.5 hours away from many of their homes. So I'm very glad that Milwaukee County, that there will be a facility here, because I just think it's going to be so much better for our youth and for our families. But there is a process to get there. It can't be like, you're naughty, you're going to Lincoln. Like, parents can't say, they can say that, but it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
More questions?
I'll ask a question while you get a microphone back here.
Okay.
You mentioned so many kids haven't really dealt with their stuff. If you don't have a serious psychiatric issue and you're not transferred to Mendota, what kind of counseling resources or mental health resources are there?
Sure. So we have recently begun DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. Many of you probably have heard of that. And so that's one of the treatments that they receive. Every youth receives DBT, and every staff has been trained in DBT. There are youth who receive, depending on what their offense is, or like if they have AODA issues, or if they have sex offender, if they need sex offender treatment, or those are actually the two, like the AODA, sex offender, and DBT are the ways of treatment. We have a large number, or good-sized number of psychiatrists or psychologists, so PSU we call them, and they are able to talk to the kids. I will say that we have, in the past couple years, we have done a much better job of responding to the emotional aspect of the kids, and it's become our policy to do that. It wasn't always that way, and so, and again, that's, I think, just the whole system is kind of reforming or changing. So it's not, I'm not saying it's the fault of anybody before, it just is, we're doing that now. We're trying to do that now. And the kids don't necessarily love the DBT groups, but they do say, oh yeah, it helps. But we also have it's called the BMS system, where kids, they earn, like they get pro-social points for when they're doing things that they should do, and then they can like lose points when they do things that they shouldn't do, and then they have a behavior grade for the week, and all of their, like they can earn their canteen, and they don't need any money there anymore. They can't buy things with canteen or buy phone calls or anything like that. It's all based on how they behave, which has increased and helped their behaviors. Again, the kids are kind of like, ugh, we don't like that system, but they do. I run a youth leadership council there as well, and so we, all stakeholders are at the table talking about what the youth, where they, the goal is to make Lincoln Hills better for all the youth who live there and the staff who work there. That's our goal of the Youth Leadership Council, so they have a voice. And one of the things that we're really excited about is now they get chocolate milk on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. That was a suggestion from the youth. So I mean, just sometimes it's, again, that easy, right? Sometimes it's just that easy. So.
I was just wondering how we could help you get more of these Bibles, because if the kids take them with them.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so that's kind of a long answer. So on the back of this little prayer, I did write some directions down. So the Bibles are about $25 each or so, about 20, depending on, well, Amazon, you can sometimes get them for 23 if you have free shipping or whatever, something, okay. But Lincoln Hills I am not able to ship them to Lincoln Hills. I have to ship them to my house, fill out the paperwork, then bring them in my vehicle, and it's a rigmarole, right? So if you would like to donate to help purchase Bibles, you can either write a check to my discretionary account from Ascension Episcopal, and with Epic Bible in the memo, and it will go in that account, and then I use that account to purchase the Bibles. If you wanted to purchase them off Amazon by yourself, you would have to send them to my house, so I would need to, I don't think I put my home address on there. I can't have you send them to the church because I just am a priest of a really small church, and people aren't there during the week. They'd sit outside and not get picked up, So you'd have to ship them to my house, and I can give you that address. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and we also, just to offer a small sign of support, our outreach team is offering $500 for the purchase of further Bibles. So
amazing.
Yeah, well, you're doing really amazing ministry. So
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course.
Thank you.
And we could easily, in our weekly email, our Thursday weekly email, we could put your address. That's a pretty large, sending. A lot of people get that, so I don't know if you want your home address in that, but we can talk about creative ways to. Oh, maybe Pam has an idea.
I'm just wondering if we could possibly donate to our outreach fund, our church outreach fund, with a memo of some sort that it's for the Bible, and then from Christ Church, we could perhaps do a larger order.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So that makes it really easy. So if you just want to write a check to Christ Church with Bibles in the memo, I'll just alert Patrice in our office, and then we'll just get you another check for whatever comes in that way.
That'd be wonderful. That'd probably be the easiest.
And maybe put some kind of time limit on it, perhaps, or
Sure.
Or would this be a ongoing thing, or just think about that, okay, and we can figure it out.
Sure.
Yes, you said that the facility is closing. They're going to, how long before they close it and have the facility up and running here in Milwaukee County?
That is the question of the day. I mean, 4 years ago they said, I mean, honestly, we've been closing since the 90s, okay? I mean, literally. So I don't know that answer. I do know, though, that things are moving along because I know that I will be involved in a meeting this week to discuss plans for what a chapel will need to look like in the new facility. I know that they have purchased the land. I believe the plans have mostly been approved. So things are moving along. I don't know that there has been enough money set aside to really invest in, I mean, these are expensive facilities. You're talking about, I mean, a type 1 facility, you have to have the razor wire, you have to have the certain security set up. So I don't know. I think it's probably going to be at least 2 years before it will be built and ready. But I really don't know. That would be really a question for our state legislature or our governor or Kevin Carr, the DOC administrator.
Yeah, maybe we should all petition the governor to use some of our surplus to help us move this along.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Yes, Jim, this young man here had a question. Yes. Yeah.
I have a question that doesn't relate to the facility or whatever.
Okay.
But what are the tattoos on your arms mean?
Oh, thank you. This one is vegetables and fruits and a big sunflower in the back. I love to garden, so I have a garden on my arm here. This is a tattoo. This arm is not quite done yet. This is looks like a mandala, and then this is a Holy Spirit. It's kind of hard to see, but this needs to be finished yet. I just have to take the time to do that.
What does the arrow mean?
Oh, thank you. So the arrow is for my youth. I got this tattoo after I started at Lincoln Hills again because how does an arrow work? It has to be pulled back, right? And I view their time at Lincoln Hills, they just have to be pulled back for a while before they can aim and be shot for the right direction. And so this arrow is for all of my youth at Lincoln.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, question back there? Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Last one.
Probably a little less about your work, but you were talking about when, what situation your youth, the youth you're working with, when they go home and what situation they're going into. Do you work with organizations to help that transition?
I do not work with organizations to help that transition, but UTO, United Think Offering, for the next 2 years, there are grants available to help with prisoner reintegration into their communities or supporting in the prisons too. But and every youth, it's different. Depending on their situation, it's different what happens when they leave. If they go directly home, or if they go to a step down or a residential or prison, or it's different for every youth depending on their situation. But I strongly urge you, if any of you have been moved by these stories, brainstorm, pray about it, think about it, because there are funds available through UTO for the next 2 years that maybe you could lay some groundwork here, in this community somehow to help these kids. I want to say that, when that facility comes here, please volunteer to go and do Bible study with these kids. Please, they need to know that they are deeply loved and they are children of God. So that's probably all we have time for. Huh?
Let's thank Amy again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry that we ran over time, but thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. I don't know how to turn this off.